Hey guys, welcome to Eyes Recapped. Recently, I watched a mind-blowing movie called The Mill, and in today's video, I'm going to share a quick recap of it with you all. If you have 10 minutes, please watch this video till the end. I hope you'll enjoy this movie as much as I did. Let's get started. Our story begins with a man named Joe, who was a manager at a company. One day, he woke up to find himself locked in a prison-like building. He had no idea how he got there. Surrounding him were high walls, a metal door in front, and a stone mill in the middle of the room. Poor Joe panicked and started calling for help, but then he heard a voice from the neighboring room telling him to keep quiet. Joe went to the grate and asked this person what was happening. The man, who introduced himself as Nick, said that Joe had been drugged, which would make him feel very down for several days. Nick advised Joe to rest because tomorrow was going to be tough. Joe had no idea how he would get out of there. Just then, a guard threw some food and a bottle of water through a hole in the door. Joe ran to it and tried to explain to the guard that his wife was pregnant and he needed to get out, but the guard ignored him and shut the hole, injuring Joe's hand. Joe then bandaged his hand with his tie and began to eat. That evening, he saw a light on the wall and heard a computerized voice welcoming him to the Advanced Career Training Program. Joe was still confused, so he asked Nick, who explained that this was a prison-like place created by their company for employees like Joe who didn't perform well at work. The next morning, Joe received more food and noticed a human skeleton buried on the ground. Terrified, he rushed to the grate again and asked Nick if someone had died there. Nick told him that many people had died while working there. Joe couldn't understand how the company could do this to them. Nick explained that before joining the company, they had all signed a contract approving this program, but no one had read it thoroughly. Now, they had to face the consequences. The computerized voice then announced that Joe had to turn the stone mill from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. each day. He would earn 1 point for every turn and needed to complete 50 points daily to avoid punishment. The person with the fewest turns would be killed, even if they had completed their daily 50 turns. Desperate to get home, Joe pleaded to be released, but Nick told him it was pointless. With no other option, Joe began to work. Turning the heavy mill was no easy task, but he gave it his all and completed 100 turns by the end of the day. Exhausted, he fell asleep, only to be awakened by the screams of a fellow prisoner being executed. The next morning, while eating and talking to Nick, Joe revealed that he had completed 100 turns the previous day. Nick warned him not to work so hard, or the company would push him to do even more. But Joe believed that by working harder, he could gain his freedom and see his pregnant wife again. While working, Joe remembered the day he gifted his wife, Kate, a new house, making her very happy. The next day, Kate had asked Joe to take the day off to go to the doctor, but he hesitated, prioritizing work over family, which made Kate very sad. Suddenly, an alarm went off, and Joe saw that he had completed 150 turns that day. A guard called him to the door and asked him to strip. Joe feared he was going to be killed. Despite his pleas, the guard didn't listen and opened the door, leading Joe to a pool. It turned out he was just being taken for a bath. Days passed with Joe working hard under the scorching sun. He started drinking more water, and soon his bottle was empty. When he asked the guard for more water, Nick told him they were only given enough to survive. Despite his exhaustion, Joe kept working, remembering his promise to Kate to pay the hospital bills. At the end of the day, he collapsed, and the AI announced that he had completed 370 turns. Resting, Joe saw the name Alex engraved under the handle. When he asked Nick about it, he learned that Alex was the only person who had managed to escape alive. The company rewarded Joe with a pen, which was of no use to him, so he angrily shouted. The next day, Joe saw that his new daily target was 370 turns. He protested, saying he couldn't do that with injured hands, but the computerized voice told him that humans are capable of more than they think. Joe noticed that even after completing 1 turn, he didn't earn a point. The computer explained that as punishment, he would now earn 1 point for every 2 turns, meaning he had to complete 370 turns. With no choice, Joe continued working, but eventually his body gave out, and he collapsed, The AI announced that he hadn't completed his turns for the day. A picture of Kate appeared on the wall, and the AI warned that if Joe didn't work, Kate would end up there too. Terrified, Joe promised to complete the target the next day. He wrapped the handle with his coat to ease the pain and put all his effort into turning the mill. At one point, he started hallucinating, seeing himself laughing at his own plight. Ignoring this, he kept going and finally completed his target just before 10 p.m. Poor Joe fell asleep exhausted. The next morning, the AI showed him a video of his wife and son, bringing tears to his eyes because he was so far from them. Later, he asked Nick how Alex managed to escape. Initially hesitant, Nick decided to help Joe upon learning about his unborn child. He directed Joe to a spot behind a column where the camera couldn't see. Joe found a hollow spot and started digging the wall with his pen. Days passed as Joe continued to expand the hole during his free time. Eventually, the hole became big enough for him to escape. As he crawled through, he hoped to find a way out, but a guard found him and beat him severely. When Joe regained consciousness, he saw the hole had been filled, and he was now punished with a target of 1,000 turns. Nick, who had also helped Joe, was punished by having his legs cut off, leaving him in excruciating pain and unable to work. This made Joe feel terrible, and he started thinking of a way to help. Joe realized that if none of the prisoners completed any turns, everyone's score would be equal, and the computer wouldn't be able to punish anyone. He convinced the other prisoners not to work. The next day began, and none of the prisoners worked. However, at the end of the day, the AI announced that those with 0 points would be executed, causing the prisoners to panic and start working again, failing Joe's plan. Nick then urged Joe to at least complete one turn to save himself, which Joe did just before the time ran out. But Joe felt awful for Nick, who couldn't complete any turns without his legs. That night, Nick revealed that he was actually Alex. He had also tried to escape through the wall hole, but was caught and placed in a different room. He hadn't told Joe the truth earlier, hoping that someone might succeed where he had failed. They bid each other farewell, and Joe lay down to sleep. He was soon awakened by Alex's agonizing screams as he was executed. The next day, the AI showed Joe another video of Kate and his son, who was now walking. This made Joe realize how long he had been imprisoned, and he became furious. He started cursing the company, prompting the computer to announce that such behavior was unacceptable and sentence him to death by hanging. Several company personnel and guards arrived, preparing a lethal injection. One guard started bad-mouthing Joe's wife and son, which enraged Joe. He began beating the guard mercilessly. The AI then said the guard had failed his job and offered Joe the next stage if he killed the guard. Joe stopped, shouting that he wasn't a monster. The company wanted to turn him into a beast, but he wouldn't let that happen. Suddenly, Joe found himself back in his office. It turned out this was all part of an advanced virtual program where everyone was connected to machines. His HR, who resembled the guard, explained that although it felt like months had passed, only an hour had gone by in reality. His son hadn't been born yet, and everything was as it was. Through this experiment, HR determined that Joe hadn't been promoted because he hadn't been adequately challenged. In the program, Joe had completed every task given to him, so the company decided to promote him. HR then took Joe to his new cubicle and gave him new targets to perform even better. He also asked Joe to sign an agreement not to disclose the experiment to anyone. After HR left, Joe called Kate, and hearing her voice brought tears to his eyes. He told her how much he loved her and their unborn child. And with that, the movie ends. If you enjoyed the video, please like it